Hello, it's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, the bizarre case of the fake carer and what it says about the state of home care in this country. Who's keeping check on the people we let into our homes to look after our loved ones? We'll have a special report from Nick Martin for you. And I'll be joined in the studio by the Chief Executive of the Home Care Association as we examine the impact on the government's Home First approach for the NHS. Also ahead, a British woman confirmed as one of the tourists killed in what appears to be a mass poisoning in Laos. Plus, Matt Hancock admits the government got it wrong on funeral advice during COVID, with protesters booing the former Health Secretary during his appearance at the inquiry. And we'll hear from friends, politicians and the people of Hull as we look back at the life of Lord John Prescott. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Good evening to you. Well, you may have heard of the new government's Home First approach. It's one of the main pillars of the plan to reform the NHS by getting more people treated at home or in the community. But what happens when that care is dangerously inadequate? Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has uncovered the bizarre story of a fake carer sent to look after a vulnerable older patient. Nick's special report has exposed deep concerns about the state of Britain's home care industry.
I was a bit shocked to learn what I did. It was all rather frightening.
The more we stop and think about it, what do we know about her? She had no training. She could have doubled your pills and killed you. It just staggers me that the police aren't interested. Because of that, she thinks she's got away with it.
It requires a lot of training to be able to handle these pipes and valves.
David is 89 years old, a successful businessman who travelled the world for 40 years. But life has slowed down a bit now, and after a stroke in the summer, he needs help at home.
We've shopped around for a carer, and the local GP practice district nurse recommended this care agency. They offered us two different people, and my father chose Tracy. And she arrived the next day on the train. This is the CV that we were given with a photograph of Tracy saying she has exceptional experience in caring for all sorts of things, including catheters.
This wasn't someone just coming in to do the groceries and doing some washing up?
No, this was somebody with experience and qualifications in personal, intimate care.
But this is not a straightforward story. It's a mystery that's left this family angry and deceived. Because from the start, the care fell short.
We had to teach her how to open and close the catheter and empty it. She'd never seen one before, which was a surprise because her certificates all said that she could do it. These are the pills. Some are taken with breakfast, some are taken before breakfast, some are taken at lunchtime. You have to know what you're doing and have a timetable. But she was just giving you pills here, there and everywhere, wasn't she?
But she just wasn't trained.
She was with us for 3 weeks, and the only time she left the house was when my children were here and they all went out for a jolly walk with Grandpa in his wheelchair.
Grandpa has seen something.
And one of my daughters was filming her children playing with Grandpa, and that's how we got our image of the woman who was with us. And as soon as she saw the camera, she stepped out of view. Nobody thought anything of it at the time. I was continuing to ring up the agency on a regular basis and saying she's useless, and they kept saying, we don't understand why you're so unhappy with this carer because we think she's marvellous. And we said, what you are describing is not the woman we had. And that's when we picked up the video and compared it to their photograph of her, and we realised it wasn't the same woman. And the next morning she just packed her bag and left. And who was she? And why was she hiding in our house?
Sarah faced two options when looking for a live-in carer for her dad: fully managed care versus introductory care agencies. While both can provide live-in carers, there are distinct differences between the two. Companies offering managed care are legally responsible for training, supervising and monitoring the care on offer. They also pay the carer's salary and national insurance. Managed care is regulated by the industry watchdog, the Care Quality Commission. Introductory care agencies, like the one Sarah used on the other hand, match carers with families. They must make sure the carer is qualified and eligible to work in the UK, but the carer is self-employed. The client employs and pays the carer direct. And crucially, this service is not regulated by the Care Quality Commission.
She basically conned £2,760 out of us to send a stranger in her place.
Whoever they were keen to get paid.
She must have thought this was such a good idea, and let's see what we can get away with. OK, let's get you down. Well done, you're down.
Right.
Your eagle has landed.
Sarah and a care agency involved both contact the police, urging them to investigate. But on November the 4th, a police officer writes to the care agency and says this: the police have limited lines of inquiry, that they'd need an independent witness to confirm the allegation, and without further evidence, it would be deemed not in the public interest to send an officer to talk to Tracy. So with the police seemingly unwilling to investigate or even to visit Tracy, I go and find out for myself.
So this is where I think Tracy lives. We've traced her address to this street. I actually know nothing about this lady, but I do want to try and talk to her to see if she can answer some of the questions we have. So I think the best thing is to go and knock on her door and see if she'll talk to me.
A few minutes later, I'm face to face with the lady at the centre of this bizarre story. And Tracy tells me she's done nothing wrong.
So you were definitely there in the house? You definitely cared for David?
for David still, yes.
Yes, because they think that a different person.
I was there. I did the job. They don't believe and they don't want to know.
I have a photograph of that person.
And that was not me. That's what you think.
So how do I explain that? Do you want to tell me this again? Is it possible you can tell me what happened? Because the image that I have of the lady who was in David Seal's house, just with respect to you, Tracy, it's not you.
Tracy takes a deep breath in.
I don't know how to explain this.
The story begins to unravel.
It's so bad, very bad, and I'm so sorry because something I've never done in my life. Because when it comes to care, I give it all.
Do you understand why the family are so upset? Because
I know.
your job was to give David medication and a total stranger was in their house, potentially giving him medication who didn't have the training.
She was trained. I gave her training because I thought it would be...
But you know that's not enough, don't you? You can't just give her training.
Yeah, I know.
Did you think that you would get away with it? No one would notice?
Yeah.
And what do you have to say to David's family?
I'm so sorry that has happened to them, which has never happened before. And I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that happened.
It's a deception that nobody saw coming.
Tracy says that there was a problem with her driving licence or a problem with her car. So she asked her friend to go in her place.
Well, she knowingly, complicitly sent a completely untrained, complete stranger into the house of a vulnerable elderly man who is very ill. God, the nerve of the woman.
Here we had someone in your house who you knew nothing about for 2.5 weeks administering medication to your frail father.
What she could have done to him. And he's on some quite serious pills. If she got it wrong, she could have done some very serious harm.
Having previously told the care agency that they had limited lines of inquiry and that they would not be sending an officer to speak to Tracy, when we approached Hampshire Police for comment, they said this: officers are carrying out a number of inquiries and the incident is still under investigation to determine whether any crimes have been committed.
OK, let's go and have a word with him.
One of the reasons why suspicions were raised so quickly is that Sarah lives next door to her father, so we're off to speak to David to get his reaction to what we've uncovered.
How do you feel about the fact that there was a total stranger in your house for nearly 3 weeks looking after you?
Well, I feel very cross about it. We've been fooled and misled, and that's entirely wrong.
And David's really clear about something else. He thinks introductory care agencies like the one the family used to hire a carer need stricter regulation.
The CQC, I thought, was responsible for regulating the care industry. When we get in touch with them to tell them about this tale, they don't want to know. There's no point in being responsible for the care industry if you only deal with people who are registered with you. It's quite pointless.
You had employed an introductory care agency. They're effectively introducing you to a carer, making sure they're legit, and then passing them on. But when it comes to someone crossing the threshold of the door, you have no way of knowing.
No. We didn't see any of the identity papers. We were just told, you know, you've chosen this woman's CV from the 2 we sent you. Here she is. It's absolutely incredible that the CQC are not involved. I reported it to the CQC and I got a response, no, it's not our problem. And I was very surprised to discover that the agency sending carers all over the district aren't regulated in any way.
The Care Quality Commission confirmed this, telling us, as neither introductory agencies or self-employed carers are covered by CQC's remit, we are unable to take action in this case. I asked Tracy if she thinks enough was done by the introductory care agency to get to know her, to fully check her out. She said she only met the agency over video call, not face-to-face.
They never meet you. You never meet anyone. I don't think I've never met anyone face-to-face from there, or they know who are you, what kind of person are you to meet you.
Do you think there should be more checks?
They have to do checks. They have to know who's going in the house. They have to make sure they meet people, because by not knowing, who knows, this wouldn't have happened.
We asked Access Care, the agency that supplied Tracy, for a comment. They told us, "We were shocked to hear of this terrible deception and are deeply sorry for what Mr. Seal and his family have experienced. When we heard of these alarming allegations, we contacted Action Fraud and the police and commenced an urgent safeguarding review. We have strict protocols in place. However, these extremely unusual circumstances have given us cause for reflection. We are in the process of developing further security checks and procedures for families in receipt of care at home."
There we go, David. Nice glass of squash.
Thank you.
The care sector is big business. Home care services in the UK are worth over £12 billion a year and rising, according to the healthcare analyst Lang Buisson. And legitimate care providers help ease the pressure on the NHS. In fact, in September, the Care Secretary Stephen Kinnock wrote to chief executives and directors of adult social care services, telling them of the government's so-called home-first approach that supports people to live independently for as long as possible, describing a relentless focus on ensuring high-quality care in the community, just like the kind of care David wanted.
That treatment in the community, that treatment at home, hinges on trust, doesn't it, for it to work? And I suppose this is an example of, it's a cautionary tale of, if we cannot get things like this right, how are we going to get all of that bigger stuff right?
You've got to know who's coming into your house. And I think the introductory agency system is clearly very flawed. If the system can be played this easily, the system needs to change and be more secure.
Well, following Nick's report there, a spokesperson for the Department of Health and Social Care said this: "Our sympathies are with David's family and friends in this deeply concerning case." A healthy NHS and social care system requires strong regulation to ensure patient and user safety. And that's why we are reforming the Care Quality Commission to make sure it is fit for purpose. Nick is here with me in the studio tonight, along with Jane Townsend, the Chief Executive of the Home Care Association. And welcome to you both. Nick, that's the third time I've watched that report today, and I'm still agog at the story of the fake carer that we saw there. And I think we've emerged from this report with more questions than answers. There's not really that much information readily available about this outlier in the care sector, this introductory care system.
That's right. And Sarah-Jane, try as we might, we have tried to find a lot about introductory care agencies. I still don't know how many there are. I still don't know how many people are employed in it. I still don't know whether the number of complaints is up or down because there's not really a complaints procedure. It is like staring into a black hole trying to figure out introductory care agencies. And yet today and tomorrow and for the next few weeks and years, introductory care agencies will be sending carers into the homes of vulnerable people. And I think after today, there is a huge question mark over that. And we have had a significant response to this story today. The Prime Minister's official spokesman said it was a deeply concerning case, which clearly shows failings in the system. And of course, big picture here, the government knows it has to reform the NHS and social care. And the question is, can we really trust that process if we've got examples like this glaring us in the face where, you know, people are able to send another person into someone's home, deal with prescription medicine and, you know, get away with it until the light's cast on it.
Jane, we know that the at-home care sector is going to get bigger because, as I described before we went into Nick's report there, it's one of the pillars of the plan to save the NHS, getting care into homes and into the community. This is an unregulated space, and David and his family have raised concerns about that, obviously because of their experience, rare as it might be, but it's frightening that that's even an option, it could happen. How do you go about regulating this Wild West space in the home care sector?
First of all, we're really sorry about David's experience and his family's experience, and we strongly believe that that should not happen. It is important to say that a vast majority of home care is regulated. It is covered by the Care Quality Commission, but in the legislation there is a loophole which allows for individual care workers to be exempt from registration. And introductory agencies, provided that they are not monitoring and managing the care on an ongoing basis, are also exempt from registration by the Care Quality Commission. So the statement that you had from the Department of Health and Social Care today is irrelevant. Why are they talking about the Care Quality Commission?
Well, actually, do you know what? I picked up on that point,
Yes.
but it made me think, is that not just a statement about the state of the home care sector in general, the care system in general, when we're looking towards a future where more care is going to be at home? You know, their response said they have to make sure the CQC is fit for purpose. I mean, this is the body that's meant to be regulating.
That's true.
You could reform the CQC until the cows come home.
It's not
but
going to
if
cover
introductory
this.
care agencies aren't within the remit of the CQC,
No.
they are going to be able to continue doing what they're doing. And I think there are growing calls from yourself and others that introductory care agencies need to be brought back into some kind of regulation, because at the moment there's no process for complaint, there's no process for audit, there's no requirement to really know for sure that when a carer turns up at the threshold of your front door, you know who they are saying they are. David had no idea that an imposter walked through his door. And that's why some families are now calling for an ID scheme so that you can be assured of that.
Because, Jane, the members of your association are part of that regulated sector. People watching tonight, I mean, families are in desperate need of carers. We're an ageing population. It is costly and it is scarce. If you were looking for somebody to look after an elderly relative at home, it's hard to come by, particularly in certain areas of the country. So what would your advice to people be? Because there is a need, it seems, for this introductory care sector, because the regulated part of that sector perhaps cannot cope with demand?
No, I think that our argument would be that the regulation should be based on the activity. because it's for public protection. And if we have loved ones that have the sort of needs that David has, you know, had a stroke, needs complex catheter care, people need training and supervision to deliver that care safely and well. And there should be one rule for everybody. You can't have one load of people over here allowed to do it without any oversight, and another load over here who have the high costs of it. Because one of the concerns is, because of the Employment Rights Bill coming in, the increases in national insurance contributions and other employment costs, it's going to unintentionally encourage more of this unregulated care. We believe that all of it should be subject to oversight. And one of the examples I use is gas engineers. You can be a self-employed gas engineer, or you can work for a big company like British Gas, but you have to be on the Gas Safe Register, and to get on the Gas Safe Register you have to do exams and you have to have your competency assessed. So you as a citizen can choose, do you want a self-employed gas engineer or do you want someone from a big company? But there's a fighting chance they're not going to blow up your house.
Nick, this is the concern, isn't it? As Jane just mentioned there, this rise in national insurance contributions and the like, and the increase in minimum wage may push carers unwittingly into this unregulated sector. And this largely, until today, until you uncovering the story, has been largely unreported on. So the government, that statement, you picked up on it saying it didn't address the issue. They're probably not really aware of it.
The Prime Minister's official spokesman said that the government inherited a broken social care system. That's a bit disingenuous, because social care has not been addressed by political parties probably going back the last 30 years. So all parties of all colours have a part to play in this. But a really important point to make about national insurance is that come April, we could see some really significant and negative changes. Because if you're a care agency at the minute and you're paying your carers national insurance, and you're about to pay more national insurance in April, and you're looking over here at a sector that doesn't need to pay national insurance because you can make your carers go freelance, and it's unregulated as well, we could see an exodus from the regulated space to the unregulated space. And that means come April, we could see more players in this area. I'm right, aren't I, in saying that? I've tried to get that across, but it could be really significant in April.
Yeah, and, one thing that perhaps not everybody, including in government, understands is that 79% of home care services are purchased by the state, so councils and NHS. And in other parts of the business sector, like, supermarkets, they can cover the costs of extra employment costs by increasing prices to customers. But in home care, we can't do that because the councils, haven't got enough money.
They can't pay it.
No. And they're encouraging, some of them, a race to the bottom on price. They're purchasing care at £18 an hour, which doesn't even cover, the direct staff costs at national minimum wage and statutory employment on costs. So, introducing new employment legislation is great, but how is it ever going to work if there isn't enough money to pay the bills?
Well, as I said off the back of your report, Nick, more questions than answers, but I know you're not done with this yet. You'll be looking for some of those answers, so we will follow the progress of this story with a great degree of interest. And Nick Martin, thank you, and Jane Townsend, CEO of Home Care Association, thank you very much. Still to come here on the programme, a British tourist becomes the 5th person to die after suspected methanol poisoning from a free shots giveaway in Laos. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock admits hospitals in England were within hours of running out of some PPE during the COVID crisis. And we'll hear from the community in Hull, remembering former Deputy Prime Minister Lord John Prescott, who has died at the age of 86.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
Sky News, the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
The latest on a developing story tonight now, and a British tourist who fell ill from suspected methanol poisoning in Laos has died. Simone White from Orpington in Kent is the fifth person to die after being given a free shot at a bar in the Vang Vieng area, a resort that's popular with backpackers. Our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch has more.
Simone White was 28 years old, a British lawyer, enjoying a great adventure in Southeast Asia. But she's now the fifth person to have died after allegedly drinking alcohol shots laced with deadly methanol during a holiday in Laos. Bianca Jones, who was 19 years old and from Melbourne, has also died from suspected poisoning. In Parliament, the Australian Prime Minister paid tribute.
All Australians offer them our deepest sympathy in this time of heartbreak. Bianca's trip should have been a joyous time and a source of fond memories in years to come. Memories that she should have carried with her into the long, bright future that lay ahead of her. It is beyond sad that this was not to be.
Her best friend Holly Bowles is in a critical condition in Bangkok Hospital in Thailand.
Our daughter remains in intensive care unit in critical condition. She's on life support. We'd just like to thank everyone from back home for all the support and love that we're receiving. But we'd also like for people to appreciate right now we just need privacy so we can spend as much time as we can with Holly.
They were staying here at Nanar Backpackers Hostel in Vang Vieng when they fell ill.
The hostel has always given out free shots of Lao vodka to our guests as a gesture of hospitality. We got the alcohol from a trusted shop in Vang Vieng. After drinking here, the guests were sober, they looked healthy, and they went out for more drinking.
Two young Danish women and a 56-year-old American man have also died. The area is popular and known for partying, but now there's fear in the air.
Everyone here is very friendly because, like, most of the people here are backpackers, so you share a few drinks with a few people, and I think maybe some of the times you're not really watching how your drink's being made or who has your drink when you're going to the toilet.
It was a trip of a lifetime. So many have shared and can recognise, but this one came with a hidden, sudden and fateful risk. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Bangkok.
Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has admitted to the COVID inquiry the government got it wrong over guidance around funerals during the pandemic. Mr Hancock also told the inquiry that some hospitals in England were within hours of running out of some items of personal protective equipment. Our health correspondent Laura Bundock has more from the inquiry.
Well, today was all about Matt Hancock, once the Health Secretary, now not even an MP, but still very much accountable. He was pressed and questioned about the decisions he made, the actions he took throughout the pandemic. Now, remember, this whole inquiry has been divided up into different sections. This is Module 3, which is all about healthcare, how COVID impacted the NHS, its staff and its patients as well. Mr. Hancock was asked about PPE and how close we'd come to running out. He said, well, there had been individual shortages. Overall, there hadn't been a shortage. He was pressed on this a bit further and admitted when he looked at the figures, it had been extremely close, and that some trusts, he said, had come within hours of running out of that all-important PPE. He was also asked about the pressures on the NHS and denied that it had become overwhelmed throughout the pandemic. But then when pushed further on this, he was played an account from a witness here recently who had worked on the front line in ICU throughout the pandemic and had described in emotional detail how nurses had run out of body bags, how he'd heard it felt like there were patients raining down from the skies. Matt Hancock insisted, though, that the NHS hadn't been overwhelmed, but it had been facing these deeply challenging problems. Now, he denied painting an overly rosy picture of the situation and insisted he was not one for buck passing when it came to being honest about the situation. Now, as he left the inquiry today, families who'd lost loved ones throughout the pandemic had gathered. They shouted at him as he got in his car and drove off. And at lunchtime today, he wasn't here to see it, but they'd rolled out a red carpet in front of the steps here, saying that they were angry that he's been given the chance to appear here for a day and a half, but their voices aren't being heard. They say they haven't had enough real people giving their accounts of what it was really like to go through COVID. Anyway, Matt Hancock left here in no doubt about the strength of their feeling. He will be back here again tomorrow, where he'll be questioned further about this stage of the inquiry, which still has more witnesses to come forward next week. It's due to wrap up soon, though. And then the next phase, which will be looking at vaccines and the treatments for COVID, isn't due to start until the beginning of next year.
Still to come on the UK Tonight, tributes to the true giant of the Labour Party, John Prescott, who has died at the age of 86. From throwing punches at protesters to getting a cold bath at the Brits, few politicians have made as much of a mark on the public consciousness as Lord John Prescott. Tony Blair's Deputy Prime Minister during his decade in power, Prescott was the old-school enforcer of the new Labour machine. But despite being criticised for enjoying the trappings of power, a champagne socialist who famously drove 2 Jags, he was a devoted local politician who championed the people of Kingston upon Hull for more than 40 years. Sky's chief political correspondent, John Craig, takes a look back at the colourful life and career of John Prescott.
Pride in our record, what we promised, we delivered. Pride in the future and what we promise to do next.
A titan, a colossus and a legend, just some of the tributes to John Prescott, a politician who pulled no punches. He was the link between Tony Blair's new Labour project and the party's more traditional roots. He saw himself as a man of the people. And yet he was known as 2 Jags because he owned one as well as using a ministerial car.
A man who fought for working class ambition because he lived it. As one of the key architects of a Labour government, John achieved that rare thing. He changed people's lives.
King Charles praised Mr Prescott's unique and indomitable character and infectious sense of humour. MP for Hull East for 40 years, Mr Prescott stood for Labour leader in 1994, but after losing to Mr Blair, he became his deputy. And after Labour's 1997 election victory, he became Deputy Prime Minister. But despite his achievements, he was often ridiculed for his unorthodox use of language.
When the Deputy Prime Minister said of local government last week, if you want to have a unitary, then you can have a ballot, discuss it with the people, but if you want it, fine. What exactly did he mean?
I think it's very, very clear, and I'm just surprised the Right Honourable Gentleman can't follow it.
People used to make fun of his speeches and his use of the English language, but he was an incredibly direct communicator. And even if the syntax never quite made sense, the sentiment was very powerful and made complete sense.
He was direct with journalists in Downing Street. And he once likened Peter Mandelson to a crab. During the 2001 election campaign, he punched a man who threw an egg at him. Mr Blair reacted by saying simply, "John is John." When Mr Blair left Downing Street in 2007, Mr Prescott quit too.
John Lennon talked about working class heroes. And it's a very difficult term to understand and follow and to be one. But I think John comes nearest to it, and I think he would like that to be his epitaph. He was a titan, he was a colossus, but he was also a working class hero.
He left the Commons in 2010 and became a life peer. His last appearance in the House of Lords was in 2022.
People talk about the Red Wall. John Prescott was the Red Wall. You know, as Tony swept the south, John Prescott held on to the north and gave people confidence.
Married to wife Pauline for more than 60 years, John Prescott was Britain's longest-serving Deputy Prime Minister.
I don't think I could ever fill John's shoes, but I'm hoping that I continue to make him proud, which is what his last words to me were.
He'll be remembered as a firebrand and a political bruiser. He was a one-off. John Craig, Sky News.
Well, let's speak now to Neil Hudgell, the owner of the rugby league side Hull KR, where Lord Prescott was on the board between 2006 and 2010. Neil, thank you very much for talking to us on the UK Tonight. First of all, condolences. You knew him. He's been described today as many things, one of which is a man of the people, but more specifically, the people of Hull. Let's talk about what the city meant to Lord Prescott and what he meant to the city.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly sad day, but when I look at that footage, I smile because there are things in there, themes in there that are the real John, because you'll have heard thousands of political tributes today to a big beast, you know, a political animal from another generation in some senses, the likes of which we have no longer. But we were fortunate enough to know a bit more of the personal John, you know, the John behind the scenes. You know, I've been to his house many times. He's been in the club countless times, in the director's box, in the boardroom, on the terraces. And so we know the personal John, and we get to see the connection with him and the community. And sometimes we'd have to shake ourselves and think this is a guy that sits around the table with kings, with presidents, but he's equally at home in the local chippy, in the Chinese, walking down the streets in the constituency where he lived. And he was a great man that could give and take on the same terms that people offered to him. And so that was part of the charm. John was like us, you know. John could make gaffes. He could drip food down his front. He could get his words wrong. He could misdescribe people. He could forget names, and that was part of the charm. But ultimately, he was a great man. He was a kind man. He had a big heart, and he was fierce.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people would say, you know, what's he like behind closed doors? But what I've heard a lot today, and you've just echoed that, Neil, is that actually there wasn't much difference. He didn't have a public persona. He was what all politicians tend to talk about. He was authentic. And I know that he was there on match day, and as you said, you know, with the board members in the boardroom on match days. And you talk about the fact that he was as at home at the local chippy and at your home ground as he was on the world stage. But he liked to blend the two and regale people with stories of, you know, his travels around the world and the people he met. He was a great entertainer in that respect, bringing that kind of world to Hull. Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, some of John was a bit of a contradiction as well, because he was a passionate man that would stand up in front of Trade Congress in front of 5,000 people and talk passionately about big world issues. But on occasion, you know, we'd have to bring him into a small room, into a small gathering. He'd stand in the corner, he'd keep his own counsel. So there was a bit of a shy side to him as well that maybe a lot of people didn't realise and didn't recognise. But deep down, John was a big family man. You know, let's not forget about Pauline, his two children, the grandchildren that he doted on, because he was able to go out there on the world stage and do these big things because at heart and behind him, he had such a strong, supportive family. Yeah. Again, I've been reading a lot about him today, and, you know, working in the world I work in, you think you know about John Prescott, but you read so much more. And I read an interview with him where he talks about feeling inferior, and that in part coming from his working class background. And, you know, look at the heights he reached. You don't get much higher than that. And he said that there was a bit of that he always carried with him. But as you've said, he is a man that he's an everyman. People could see themselves in him. So to see him on the world stage, that was pretty inspiring for, you know, where he came from Wales and his adopted city of Hull. I mean, he did so much for, you know, climate change, getting the Channel Tunnel across the line, you know, upgrading of social housing. But for Hull, I've heard tributes today from the University of Hull describing him as a great friend. Hull Trains calling him instrumental in our initial establishment. And he was credited with securing funding for the Hull tidal barrier. So he always went back to his roots, didn't he? People could identify him for that because they felt that he spoke for them and stood up for them. He didn't forget his roots. I think that's what's important. In 40 years, he wasn't from Hull, but people would obviously relate to him being in Hull. He lived in the middle of Hull, which in itself, you know, is in a goldfish bowl. So John couldn't walk down the street without having a conversation. And when times aren't great, those conversations were obviously very difficult, but he always faced it off. And if you go around Hull, there's so many tangible examples of the difference that he's made. And that's why I think that people are very sad at his passing, because a little bit of them dies with him. Neil, just a personal reflection, if I may. As you said, you've been to his house many times. You'll know his wife, Pauline, of course. So many people sending their condolences to her and their sons and wider family and friends. Personally, how will you be remembering him? Well, I just remember him as a kind, warm, funny man. You know, I have so many stories of John, and, you know, we chuckled about a few, but one of the very first times I met him, he fell asleep on me. I didn't really know him, and I'd gone to pitch to him to do something at the club, and he was in the middle of being the deputy PM, so he's working 20-hour days, and he's in his back parlour. I'm sat there talking, and his head bobs, and it's like, well, what do I do next here?
And I just sit and I just sit and I just sit, and about 3 or 4 minutes later, the light switch comes on in him, and he just carries on as though nothing's happened. And I didn't know him well enough at the time to mention it, but many times since I have done, and we both laughed about it. And I just remember him as this fantastic character that lit up a room, could tell stories about presidents and kings, but ultimately was one of those, and will be very, very sadly missed.
Oh, Neil, thank you so much for talking to us. And we didn't fall asleep on you because it was very entertaining to hear about Lord Prescott, your friend John Prescott, your association with him through Hull KR, a friend and a colleague. Thank you so much for paying tribute to him tonight. We really appreciate it. It was great to hear from you. Still to come on the programme, a mouse in the house, but for a very good reason. We'll explain more about what's going on here in just a moment.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
Yeah.
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the 2-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it. This is brilliant.
This may be the Premier League.
I'm not like everybody else.
But this duo have been in a league of their own. It's Haaland, a striker like no other.
Like everybody else.
Son, Starman, the Tottenham Hotspur.
Like everybody else.
That's just stunning. Wow!
Like everybody else.
Manchester City, Tottenham on NBC and Peacock.
Hello, welcome back. Still to come, how the son of a man living with dementia helped his dad by building a very fancy house for a mouse. It's not so much a house, it's a whole village. We'll have a look at that in a few minutes' time. But first, Chris is here with the sport. And as we came on air at 8 o'clock, there was an alert on my phone. Thank goodness it was on silence. It was a Sky News alert which told me that Pep Guardiola has signed a new extension with Manchester City. But there's a surprise twist, something we weren't expecting, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's huge news for all football fans, but it's massive news, this, for Manchester City fans, because it's a 2-year contract extension.
We only thought it was going to be 1, didn't we?
1, maybe with an option that if Pep wanted to, he could stay on. But he's signed a deal to the end of the 2026-27 season. And this is really interesting timing. They've just lost 4 games in a row. They're on their worst run under Pep Guardiola. But I think everyone knows that's a bit of an anomaly when you look at all that he's achieved in his 9 years at the club. 6 Premier Leagues, 2 FA Cups, 4 EFL Cups, and the Champions League in 2023. That was the famous treble season.
Yep.
They won the Club World Cup, and this coming summer, they'll contest the first ever expanded FIFA Club World Cup, so they could win another trophy. But it'll take him beyond a decade at the Etihad, and I know how much this will mean to City fans, but also to fans of the game in general. The Brighton boss, Fabian Herzler, said earlier today, it's great news that Pep will be staying on, not just for fans of his club, but for all fans, because he makes the game better.
Yeah, and I know that when away fans go to the Etihad, they want to see Pep, don't they, as well?
Yeah,
a lot of other teams and managers get excited.
You tend to get beat there.
Yeah, but they just like to be in his presence, don't they? Something about this is interesting in terms of timing, because there's an important meeting in London tomorrow concerning Manchester City, and this is about matters off the pitch. Perhaps not quite as exciting, but just as important, perhaps.
So bear with me, because it feels a little bit dry on the face of it. So the Premier League clubs have their monthly meeting tomorrow, and they're going to vote on associated party transactions. So this is sponsorship deals when it relates to companies connected to those clubs. You think about Manchester City, we can see on the screen behind us, Etihad Airways is their sponsor. Etihad Airways connected to the owners of Manchester City. So it all relates to that. And they challenged the Premier League's rules on these associated party transactions. And last month, it was ruled by a tribunal that some of the rules in there were unlawful. Premier League went away and said, fine, we'll tweak them, we'll change them, and that's what's being voted on tomorrow. But Manchester City is saying, hang on, no, they're unlawful. You can't tweak them. You've got to go and redraft them from the start. So anyway, tomorrow they're going to vote. If 14 clubs vote in favour of the Premier League amendments, they will pass. If only 7 vote against, we know that Manchester City are supported by Aston Villa, they need 5 more clubs, then it wouldn't pass. And so that's what they'll be voting on tomorrow.
Oh, there'll be some phone calls going on tonight, won't there?
Yeah, I think there will. They'll be busy. Right, let's have a look at the rest of the sport, shall we?
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Two England internationals. One, in theory, delicious recipe. One fierce cooking challenge to mark the ECB's Taste of Cricket campaign. What could possibly go wrong?
Here in the kitchen, Jamie and Izzy making, Izzy?
Banana pancakes.
Which apparently is your recipe, which seems unfair on Jamie.
Only if it's good.
Given that this is your recipe, I want some tips for him before we start.
There isn't really any measurements.
Good start.
Just kind
this
of
is encouraging.
Go on feel.
So, banana pancakes on the menu, and Izzy taking a loose approach to both methods and measurements.
It's like they say vanilla's like the garlic of baking. Vanilla extract is to baking what garlic is to cooking. If it says 3, put in 6.
When you say they, who is they?
Just people.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Now, when you hear the words mouse in the house, most of you are probably running to hide or reaching for something to shoo it out of the house, humanely, of course. But not so my next guest. Instead, Jez Robinson created a mouse village in his back garden to help his dad, who is suffering from vascular dementia and Alzheimer's. The so-called Bramble Village is home to the Frog and Mouse pub and is open to all types of wildlife, mice, of course, but also birds, squirrels, hedgehogs, and a couple of foxes, I'm told, as well. I bet they'd bark from the pub when the mouse clan are in. Well, this little backyard community is regularly streamed online and has amassed millions of likes and hundreds of thousands of followers. 250,000 followers on Facebook. Well, let's speak now to the man behind it all, wildlife photographer Jez Robinson. Jez, thank you so much for joining us tonight. What a wonderful village you have created. While we talk, we're going to spoil viewers with some of these marvellous images that you put out there to people. Talk to me about how this first started.
Hi, Sarah. Back in 2020, when we were in lockdown, we weren't allowed to go out in first lockdown. I've always been interested in wildlife and photographing wildlife in garden. We get lots of different varieties of birds, hedgehogs, etc., etc. But I spotted a mouse on decking, started taking some photos, and it started there, really. My dad were diagnosed with dementia when we first found him, but I used to take him out at weekends while he was still able and still living at home with my mum. And grandkids said, why don't you put it on Facebook, Grandad, Noah and Minnie? So they talked me into it. One Sunday morning, we came up with a name, the Mouse Family that lived by the Brambles. And a couple of months later, got 5,000 followers. It was crazy. Fast forward 4 years, on over 3 social media channels, there's over 500,000 followers. I could never believe it. And some of the feedback's crazy. And then when I used to bring my dad to our house for his Sunday dinner, him and my mum, he wanted to go in garden. and we started watching mice in garden, and that's how it started. And every time he came, first thing he wanted to do, he didn't want to come in the house for a cup of tea or anything. He wanted to go straight up garden, so I used to take him up garden. And as I say, they didn't just give me dad a lot of joy. They gave a lot of people a lot of joy. We've had a lot of testing times in the last 4 years through one reason or another, and they give people a big smile, and that's what it's all about, really.
Oh, well, Jez, I love what you've done with the village, because there is a pub. They have a disco night at the Mouse and Frog. Here it is. And also, you've had snow there recently, so the mice built a snow mouse. Just talk to me about the effect it has on your dad, because I know that you live stream every day on Facebook, and a dementia care home in Wales watch every day. It really does bring such joy to your dad, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. I go live. I use some snippets of video to show him when I visit him each week in care home, because he's now obviously in care home. But I also do individual videos for my dad. Take loads of photos, and he doesn't always know who I am. A lot of the time he doesn't know who I am, but he does know the mice all the time, and that's brilliant.
Oh, Jez, well, listen.
And for the first 6 months before he got so bad, my mum couldn't look after him anymore. Yeah. We did his best as a family, my brothers and sisters, but we made a difficult decision. He had to go in care home. Oh. And
well, listen, Jez, this is a really important way of you connecting with your dad, and you're bringing joy to so many others who are in a similar position.
Oh,
Thank you so much for telling us your story, and good luck with it all.
No problem. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks.